and welcome to this week's show. I'm Sara Mondaini.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan, and welcome to Hocus Focus, episode number 2. And it's great to be here, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for the huge response to last week's show. The love and support was, to say the least, overwhelming and really appreciated. So we're both really happy to be back here, bringing more of what you want. Do you agree, Thomas?
Yes, that was, and also people have been sharing the show because I think it's up to about 8,000 or 9,000 views, and we haven't even done our close to a week yet. So that's like VON type numbers. So thanks very much for sharing it around. That means a lot as well. I think the subject that was Sarah's idea to pick up the Deepak Chopra thing, and I think that's really it's showing up in search engines and stuff. So it just goes to show you there's a big audience for this stuff. There's a lot of people interested in these kinds of things.
It's true. And I've got another big name for tonight's show. I came across a snippet regarding Liam Gallagher and the ghost of John Lennon in a collection of paranormal tales from an old book I got called Hauntings, True Stories of Unique Spirits by Paul Rowland. And it's a collection of paranormal tales of ghosts around the world. And I found this story quite amusing because I do like Liam Gallagher. I like his personality. And this story that I found was just very Liam Gallagher. So I'm just going to read this to you, and then we can get straight in with tonight's first topic, which is the Forteana of John Lennon. Rock star Liam Gallagher of Britpop band Oasis is reported to be living in fear of a ghost which haunts his luxury London home. In a British newspaper interview, a friend of the band confided that Liam now has difficulty sleeping because he believes he's being haunted by the phantom of former Beatle John Lennon, who was murdered in 1980. He lies awake listening with the lights on, and sometimes Liam wakes up and feels as though he's being watched by someone from another walk of life. One would imagine that Liam would welcome the chance to chat with his musical hero, but it seems he fears he's being pursued by the restless spirit. Liam says, "I was in Manchester at a mate's house after he first encountered Lennon's ghost during an out-of-body experience. He turned round, and there I was lying on the bed, and I sort of fell back into my own body, and there was a presence there, and it was him, Lennon." Cynics might say that such experiences are often induced by overindulgence in alcohol and non-prescription pharmaceuticals, while music critics would no doubt claim that Lennon has come back to claim his share of the royalties for all the tunes that the Gallagher brothers ripped off from the old Beatles albums. And this was back in 2008. This isn't a recent story.
Well, that's an interesting thing. There's an author in Liverpool called Tom Sleeman, and he writes books about haunted Liverpool, and he must have dozens of them by now, nearly 100. And although he calls the books Haunted Liverpool, it's really should be Liverpool Forteana, because he covers an awful lot of time slips. And in one story he covered, he spoke about this guy who on Bold Street in Liverpool went through a time slip. Now, Bold Street in Liverpool, this also ties in with the John Lennon thing. The theory behind that being so full of all these mysterious events is that when they dug the railway station in the ground there, they went through a gigantic quartz crystal seam. And this seems to have energetically caused all these mysterious events to take place in Liverpool and around Merseyside. But anyway, this young lad had found himself in a different reality, and he was an Oasis fan, and he saw a newspaper headline that said that Liam Gallagher had been stabbed in a fight and died. And he was very upset about it. And he went around to his apartment where his girlfriend lived, and some other person was living there. And he had found himself in an alternate reality. And he came back into this reality eventually to find out that none of that stuff had happened. But that's kind of interesting too, because that ties the two stories together beautifully on both sides, like both from Gallagher's side and both from Lennon's side.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Did he tell anybody about this? Did anybody else experienced anything similar? The timeline.
Well, yeah, his books are full of this. Liverpool is famous for time slips and all kinds of stuff like that. I have friends in Liverpool who've experienced these things. It's so common there that people don't even blink about it. It's like I think that's one of the reasons like Liverpool feels so magical anyway. It is because of this whatever's there causes these effects. And I think that theory of the giant quartz crystal seam under Bowl Street is probably, the best explanation I've heard yet. But it could be
Mhm.
something else that goes back to, ancient pagan times or something.
Right. It's very interesting because there's been a lot of strangeness around John Lennon as well, both before and after he died.
Yeah.
Um, I've got some reports here by people who were close to him that I'm going to share with you. And I also wanted to bring into the mix John Lennon's interest in the occult, in particular numerology, and his obsession with the presence of the number nine in his life.
Tell us about the number nine thing.
Yeah, well, he read a book. It was a book about numerology, and it was by a Japanese guy, and I can't pronounce the name properly, but I'm just going to say it as I see it. It's Chiro's Book of Numbers. Have I said that right? Well, he discovered this book, and it explained in kind of simple language the occult science of numerology, and basically Lennon's life was surrounded by the number nine. So, for example, he was born on October the 9th, and he considered it his lucky number. His son Sean was born on the 9th of October. He'd written songs called The One After 909, Revolution Number Nine Dream,
Yeah.
and Epstein first saw the Beatles at the Cavern on November the 9th, and he met Yoko Ono on November the 9th. And it was after reading this book by this guy that Lennon came to understand that this multiples of nine, in particular 18 and 27, they were as important as the number nine number itself. And he learnt that the single numbers represent the material side of life, and the numbers from 10 upwards represent the more occult or spiritual side of life. And after that, Lennon was unable to go out without obsessing or analysing every single number plate and phone number and address that he came into contact with. So he became a little paranoid by it, even mystified by it and paranoid at the same time.
Did nine play any part in his assassination or anything like that we know of?
I think it was they when we looked at Mark Chapman's numerology, which I've not brought with me, it was the number 27 was quite repetitive, which when you add the two numbers and bring it down to a single number, it was number nine. So yeah, it was a multiple of nine.
That's
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah. Lennon has so much stuff around him. I mean, he was very interested in, not long before he died, there were huge UFO flaps up and down the Hudson River in New York, and he was privy to these. When I was a young lad, I first moved to New York. I got a job working as a waiter in a like an Irish pub restaurant, and it was very popular with cops. And one Saturday I was working, they had the Beatles sort of like Beatles con, like the get together in
Hmm.
Madison Square Gardens, which was just across the street. And there was one of the coppers. I got talking to one of the cops. I knew them all. But after a while, it became they were like very. They all knew me, knew who I was. We got chatting to them, and two coppers there told me that the John Lennon's assassination never made any sense, and there was multiple Mark Chapman seen around Central Park that day, and he said that was a hit piece, and there was the FBI were involved, and so there's weird stuff going on with that. And another thing, if you've been to Liverpool, I mean, if you go out to the airport, at the John Lennon International
Hmm.
Airport, you go down Menlo, the Avenue was one of the approach roads to it, through Allerton, where John Lennon grew up. And his house, like literally Strawberry Fields, is just around the corner from where his house is. And it is this kind of mystical little park. And then there's a huge park on the other side of Menlo Avenue across the road. And it has some of the oldest trees in Britain are in the park. And there's also a stone circle. And all the streets around there have names like Druids this, Druids that, yew tree this, yew tree that, all things connected to ancient Celtic mysticism. And he spoke about in that park he had when he was young, listening to the Salvation Army band playing. He had a kind of a peak in like the way he describes it is like Maslow's peak experience, where he was transported into a different state of being. So
Right.
all his life, he seems to have been surrounded by this stuff for some
Mhm.
reason.
Yeah, I'd agree. He even was plagued with premonitions of his own death as well.
Yeah, there's that famous thing where he gets a letter. You hear him reading it out. He's when he was in Amsterdam, and I miss Jim to Lennon. I'm a psychic, and someone's going to shoot you. And he read that out in the film. Yeah, and you can see him reading it out. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that. There was so much Fortean around him. Grant Morrison, the comic book actor artist, he well, invoked, but he generated John Lennon's head in his living room one night, using Lovecraftian type rituals from like Simon's Necronomicon, and he resolved the rotating head of a giant rotating head of John Lennon in his living room, and he said something like, or someone else was writing about this. That says Lennon is very easy to manifest in magical rituals. His image. Now, this could be because of the mystique about them and the magic generated by his music and stuff. But when you start looking into the sort of like the 40 Arna of John Lennon, it's absolutely enormous.
Right. That's and was that head the actual head of the spirit of Lennon, or was that just some kind of manifestation that resembled the
No, it
head?
wasn't his. It wasn't. Yeah, it was. You see, when you resolve these entities or you generate these entities in chaos magic, or and then they're spiritual forms that wrap themselves, encapsulate themselves in what you're expecting. So, I mean, a lot of people make fun of Simon's Necronomicon because they say that how can it possibly work? But it does work. It absolutely does work. And even though they're magicians are dubious of it, and the reason why it works is because well, reality is malleable, and and a lot of criticism says that the Necronomicon is edgy and it's aimed at teenagers, but it still works and it generates Lovecraftian entities. Now, that doesn't mean that in Nub Sugar Up is in your living room. It's some kind of spiritual consciousness form that resolves in the shape of this entity, and that's what you actually see. What you see is not what the thing actually is. So Grant Morrison was an enormous um, Lennon Beatles fan, and he wanted to bring a John Lennon figure, and he said he made a giant head of John Lennon rotating in his living room, and he said no, it wasn't John Lennon, but he had just built himself up into a powerful psychic state within Lennon's songs and things like that, and this kind of thing, and that's how it happened. Very interesting, but
So he
but
he
Lennon,
he generated some sort of metaphysical matter or ectoplasm kind of thing. Do you mean?
yeah, like a tulpa, like what the Buddhists talk about. Well,
Mm,
the philosophers talk about really, and yeah, like something like that. But it wasn't Lennon. It was a being or an entity or a spiritual force that assumed that the encapsulated Lennon's form within it, which is how a lot of these magic things. Because we probably couldn't comprehend these things otherwise. So what we do is the way in like fairy folklore where a spiritual entity might or a god in Hellenic say Zeus might appear as a swan or this kind of thing. And this happens. The pagan gods actually will appear as an animal or something. Well, it's just so we can understand it. And there's a lot of interesting truth to this because if you look at the how the Bible really describes angels, in recent years that's become a big deal, and that they're nothing like the image of the angel with the wings and the sword and the gown. They're bizarre and they're bizarre chaos forms.
right.
So yeah, yeah, they're like really strange looking and everything, and and so that's why they would say, "Do not be afraid," because this sort of like chaos resolved machine appears, and there's a mechanical process to sort of like their nature, and so. And I think I've never done it, but I've heard that like when you do bring forth many of these like Lovecraftian beings, you get electrical noises start happening. Like you get these kind of almost like wires are shorting out somewhere or something or static.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's that's no mean feat to manifest the head of somebody that looks like John Lennon. Wow.
Yeah, online it is out there. You can actually it's in a podcast somewhere. But, yeah, and Matt Morrison's an interesting guy too as well. He actually created a comic book character, and I think the comic book character in the comic got cancer, and Grant Morrison got cancer from the same thing. He was generating. He had so thrown himself into the character that what happened to the character negative started happening to him too. So you have to change the storyline that the character got better to
Right.
treat the cancer, which is just unbelievable stuff. But like back to John Lennon, I don't think that John Lennon could have actually. I think he's almost like um, he's almost like the embodiment of the strangers of Liverpool and the
Yeah.
40th of Liverpool. It's almost like he's the holy guardian angel of the high strangeness and hauntology of Liverpool. You know, even where he was born, that neighborhood is like it's an upper middle class neighborhood. It's very nice. He wasn't a working class hero. That's a complete myth. He came from like very comfortable background. The rest of the Beatles were all working class, but he wasn't. And that neighborhood with the stone circle and everything, and it's he was primed in the actual location, and then he carried that through his music. Because I mean, I listen to the Beatles, and I'm not a big fan of their music really, but you cannot deny the fact that it has changed the world
Yeah.
and reached billions of people. You know, and so he and the Beatles, but specifically him, were created as almost like well, he's now already a god form in many ways. He inspires so many people and like things like the peace movements and stuff like that. Well, yeah, yeah. Do you have any more stories there that you found
I
about him?
I do, just from some people who were close to him regarding some paranormal experiences and prophecies regarding his death, premonitions and things like that. So I've got a report here from his wife, Cynthia Lennon, who in 1966 says that Lennon received a letter. I think this is what you were talking about, from a psychic warning him that he would be shot whilst living in the United States. And from that time onwards, he developed an interest in spiritualism and attended numerous seances. And it was rumoured that during one seance, the spirits of his manager, Brian Epstein, warned him that he would be shot and he needed to take care. And then again in 1969, while he was on holiday in Greece, Lennon was warned by a psychic that he'd be killed on the island. And believing that the astrologer was referring to the Greek island, he went straight home. And it wasn't until years later that his wife, Yoko Ono, realised that the astrologer was referring to the island of Manhattan. And it seemed that John Lennon lived his whole life in the public eye, in fear of that assassination. And despite the warnings of the psychics and the astrologers and the mystics, and his own sense that he was going to die young, he could do nothing to avoid it because it seems it was his fate.
He also lived in that building where he was shot, the Dakota building by Central Park. It's on Central Park West,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a scary looking building. It's like a Beaux Arts, but it's almost Gothic looking. But
Yeah.
that's also where the movie Rosemary's Baby was made.
That's right. Yeah, there's been a few ghostly sightings at the Dakota as well, in and around the Dakota where he lived and died. And it's described as a sprawling Gothic building built in the late 19th century. And again, yeah, its exterior was used in the film Rosemary's Baby. And it's attracted rumours of hauntings and curses ever since. And Lennon himself claims to have witnessed the ghost of a lady crying and walking towards him along the corridors before disappearing into thin air. And then there was two residents of the building who 2 years after Lennon's death saw John Lennon standing in the doorway where he'd been assassinated, and they said he was bathed in an eerie light, and John appeared to be deep in thought, perhaps contemplating the utter futility of his passing. And Yoko's witnessed some ghostly images at the Dakota. She says she saw her husband in the apartment they once shared, and he was sat at his grand piano, and he turned to Yoko and comforted her with the words, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you."
Yeah, I mean, then again, once again, you do wonder if that's the actual ghost or spirit of him. or one of these chaos resolved forms brought about by the grief and the need.
Mhm.
It's like lots of people see their someone who's close to them died. Right, they see them right in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, as clear as day. You can actually touch them, feeling and like you could. And that's always been. I've even seen a documentary once with a British neurosurgeon who was an atheist who saw her father in their hotel room, and she tried to claim it was a hallucination. But I know that was probably an actual energetic thought form she brought into reality. So we could be dealing with something like that. I don't believe you come back or you wander as a spirit. I believe you actually instantaneously reincarnate. That's what I believe anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I've got one more here. This involved the remaining Beatles. In 1977, John Lennon wrote and recorded the song "Free as a Bird," and then 15 years after his death, the surviving three Beatles added their voices to that track. And throughout the recordings, the three men said they felt the presence of John, and they even claimed to hear his name as the song faded out. And it was at a photo shoot afterwards that brought the real surprise, though, because during his lifetime, John promised to send his loved ones a white feather as a sign when he passed away. And as the photographers snapped the group, a rare white peacock ran into the shot to the amusement of the three bandmates. And Paul McCartney later said, "That's John, that's spooky, eh?" And
Well,
it was like John was hanging around.
isn't that the thing in Celtic mythology that a bird is just a dead ancestor? That
Right,
that that a bird represents, the appearance of someone who died, and that a dead friend or an ancestor.
right. Yeah, it's interesting. So he may have sent that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, lots of people who've been around him just claim to have had messages from him, or they've seen him, or they've been around him when he had these premonitions and warnings about his death,
yeah.
which
No,
plagued
it's
him.
yeah, no, it's remarkable. I can remember when he actually died. I was very young. I was still in school, and I had a part-time job washing dishes in a restaurant. I was must have been about 14 or something, 15. And there was a guy there called John, and he was an older man. He was actually like a supervisor. And he came in and he goes, "Hey, how's it going, Thomas?" And I said, "Good to hear what happened to John Lennon." And I says, "Well, no." And he goes, "Oh, they got him." Like I always thought that was a very strange way he said that. They got him. He didn't say, "Oh, he was shot," or "He died," or "Some idiot killed him." They got him. That always stuck with me, but I remember that as clear as day. And yeah,
Right. And just going back to the numerology aspect with the number 9 featuring heavily in his life, I've actually got some information here on the number 9. Number 9 persons are fighters in all they attempt in life, and they usually have difficult times in their early years, but generally are in the end successful by their grit, strong will, and determination. They have hasty tempers, they are impulsive, independent, and they desire to be their own masters.
I also have a faint memory. I could be wrong. That his aunt who raised him was herself, or the mother, some female in his family. Yeah, he was raised by women, basically.
Yeah.
That they were all into spiritualism and things like that.
Mhm. Is it Auntie Mimi? I think she was called.
Yeah, yeah. He was basically, there was no men in his adult men in his childhood. They were all women.
Yeah,
And they were all I remember reading somewhere, hearing somewhere, they were all big into spiritualism.
right. Well, John Lennon would be the first to admit as well that, with regards to his temper, he was quite a violent man and he had trouble controlling his temper. And he said that's why he used to go on about peace and love all the time.
Well, he did. There is, we don't know what's true or not, but his wife Cynthia said that he battered him. He
Yeah,
battered her a few
yeah,
times. Yeah, she seems like a nice lady, so it's probably true.
yeah,
But you know, he, it's the whole thing. He was, if you're going to judge a person on the bad things they've done, well, you might as well forget about everybody.
yeah,
It's he's the sum totality of his life,
yeah.
and that's a horrible thing to do. But uh, we don't know what kind of demons were inside him. We just, I mean, that's what the creative genius was called, the daemon. That's where the word demon comes from. Daemon, it's a Greek word that means the genius inside you. And some people's daemons are far more complicated than others.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in the public, as far as the public's concerned, we should just focus on his artistry, really.
Yeah, yeah,
His
and
private
also,
life is his private life.
yeah, unless they did something really horribly illegal,
Yeah, yeah.
evil, something like really evil. But it sounds like that his domestic abuse thing was more born out of immaturity or something.
Immaturity, possibly circumstance from growing up before his father left, all kinds of things you could speculate on, but none of us know. So
Yeah,
it's just the artist for me.
yeah, and don't forget the whole Beatles and their time with the Maharishi in India. They were the ones they made Hinduism and Eastern spirituality, the norm. They were the ones who brought Ravi Shankar over and stuff.
Mm.
And a lot of the interest that grew in Buddhism and in Hare Krishna even, that definitely they played a huge part in that. So they were almost like bringing the old pagan world back to Europe via that
Yeah,
kind of, and you often well, maybe Mark Chapman was possessed by some kind of Choronzonic entity or something like that. Chapman, by his bio, having read about him, was absolutely a perfect uh, vessel for a walk in. He was classic NPC. He failed at everything he did in his life. He was not very bright. He had a very kind of warped imagination, and he blamed everybody for all his own failings. You could never accept that he was his problems were caused by himself. And in the end, like so many of these NPC, and you get these like Truther types, I like this as well. They pick on a target, and that target is responsible for all the problems in their lives. And he picked on John Lennon. John Lennon was responsible for all his problems in his life. So he was a classic case of a perfect vessel for a chronzonic type walk in.
yeah.
So like even on that aspect of it, it's there.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so it's that time of the week again when we go over to our intrepid weather reporter, Thomas Sheridan, and ask him, will we need our Renfield raincoats for this week? Thomas.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Psychic Weather. Very interesting stuff this week. We had a mild Renfielding 2 days ago, and it died down very quickly. And I thought we were going to head for a Renfielding supercell, but we didn't get that in the end. What we got was a very quick blast of Renfielding. What I've noticed at the moment in the psychic weather is a strange sense of that confidence I spoke about last week seems to be continuing. It's almost like that people have developed a new kind of bravado or something inside them. And there's a sense of security around people. Now, considering that everyone I know is in the tribe, we're likely not needle crafted. So I can't speak for the ones who are needle crafted. I can't speak for them. But among the people I know personally, there's a lot of that kind of resolve, and where they're feeling quite strong inside. Now, this could be a difficult period coming up because usually when the psychic weather lifts, then we have our old friends from the other side come in and try to wreck things. So I would say to people this week is be wary of coronzonic prone individuals around you, people who are prone to flare ups, hysteria, gossiping, um, unhinged behavior, people who smoke a lot of weed, people who drink a lot of cheap alcohol, and who are definitely troublemakers when they want to be. They might be activated in order to try and take down the rest of us who are actually feeling pretty brave and positive and moving forward right now. So that's my week in psychic weather this week. we're doing okay. We avoided a Renfielding supercell, but we might be having a chronsonic entity walk in flare up. So just tread carefully around the unhinged and the unstable and the easily rattled. And also people with addictive personalities might be a good idea not to hang out with them too much, and maybe not even drink yourself too much or do things like that. You know, my final closing would be, stick the course. It's okay. Things are pretty good at the moment, and that's the week in psychic weather with me, Thomas Sheridan.
Thank you. So keep your Renfield raincoat handy and keep yourself to
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah, and don't get drawn into things. Don't get drawn into the arguments, trouble, other people's problems. You'll have the energy. You might have the energy. You see, there's a kind of a balance to all this stuff. That when people are feeling good, the dark side tries to take them down, and how it does it is through walk-ins of you know easily accessible individuals. So that's why alcoholics and drug addicts and people who are at addictive personalities make very easy walk-ins, or people who are just rattled or unhinged, or desperately insecure people, that kind of thing. So, but as regards to tribes, I think it's like pretty good at the moment. I think I see a lot of positivity and a lot of good feel good kind of thing going on.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, so we come to the part of the show where we cover our main topic. And this week, we're going to be looking at, was this the last Pope in regards to what's been going on with what happened with Pope Benedict? And
which pope it is, him or Francis?
And which Pope it is, yeah. And I just wanted to start this section by telling you that I watched a video that Thomas sent me by a man called Glenn Beck. And in it, he talked about Pope Francis delivering a warning to the Curia. And Pope Francis said to be vigilant of demons in the Vatican. And he said that it's not a loud demon, but it's very elegant, and it comes with flowers, and it lurks among the Vatican staff. Now, in that same video, Glenn Beck said he visited the Vatican and he was at an event there with the cardinals. Now, I can't bring to mind what the occasion was, but one cardinal who was there told him that there was a war inside the Vatican, and it was a war of good and evil, but with a political aspect. And Glenn Beck said it was almost like this cardinal was referring to the deep state. And that raises a couple of questions. Was Pope Benedict trying to fix or expose this corruption from the inside? And is it the same non-human consciousness that has infiltrated the White House, the very same that this cardinal's been talking about within the Vatican? Is it this non-human consciousness that's walking about this earth at the moment and running amok? Has it infiltrated the Vatican?
Well, yeah, we can talk about that, and we'll talk about the whole Vatican stuff is fascinating. Anyway, I'm not, I've always been fascinated by the whole thing, but we'll go over why he's considered might be the last pope. Back in the 1100s, there was an Irish saint called Saint Malachy, and he was ordained at Armagh, which used to be the center. It was actually the pagan center of Ireland. It was venerated to the goddess the Morrigan, Amaka, and it was a Christian site at that time, but Christianity was failing in Ireland, and the people were not really interested in the new Roman version of Christianity, and the actual Celtic churches was kind of falling apart, and so people were not necessarily reverting to paganism, but they were kind of, it was a mess. It wasn't where Rome wanted Ireland to be. So he went to Bangor Abbey, and where he reformed the Irish Church, and he was the one that decided that like the early church buildings in Ireland should be now shaped in Romanesque architecture and this kind of thing. So he Romanized the church in Ireland. Well, anyway, he had this book of reforms that had been very successful, but he had to have them signed off by the Pope. And he went on a pilgrimage to Rome to get these documents signed by the Pope. And on the way, he met St. Bernard at his monastery, and they became very close friends. And he then went to Rome. He was a superstar in the Pope in the Vatican because of all the great work he'd done in Ireland. And the Pope was delighted to see him and signed all the documents. And then something happened. He had a vision on his way back to Ireland. He had a vision. He was still in Rome though, and the vision was that there were 111 popes left after the current pope of his time, and that was 1140ish. And Saint Malachy gave them all names. And he said that the last pope would be someone who was mentioned with connected to the beauty or the glory of the olive, this kind of thing. And then the last one would be to do with the flowers, something to do with the flowers, the Roman flowers, and that would be the Antichrist pope that would destroy everything. So would destroy Rome, and so he went on his way back. He went back to Ireland, and then he went back to see the Pope again. But on the way, he died in Saint Bernard's monastery. And then Saint Bernard wrote this whole, basically his biography, to say what a great man he was, blah 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 blah. Then 600 years later, 400 years later, so when the church was in turmoil, somebody pulled his prophecy of the popes out, St. Malachy's prophecy of the Pope, out of the Vatican library. And this is where the controversy starts. It seems too accurate. Now, there's some people within the Vatican say it's an elaborate forgery because the early popes he mentioned are almost identical to what happened. But just because they edited the stuff before the 1500s doesn't mean they were able to edit the stuff afterwards. So it might have been, the first part might have been sexed up to give the prophecy more veracity, but it has worked out. So anyway, Pope Benedict, Cardinal Ratzinger, a highly intellectual and interesting man who wrote one of the most interesting essays on the third secret of Fatima. We get to that later. He was a church reformer in a different kind of way. He wasn't an ultra-conservative like Pope John Paul II. He was a very strict old-time, by-the-book Catholic, but he was actually a highly intellectual and very likable man by all accounts. Now, this is where it gets interesting. He said that the story that was put out there by the Vatican was that he had to step down from the papacy because of poor health. And he wasn't the first pope to do this. There happened previous popes who have had to step down because of health and things like that. But the last one before him was like 500 years, 600 years. So it was the first one in a long time. He was German. And now, did he step down to try and prevent the anti-pope taking over? This is what's kind of interesting, because for the first time in hundreds of years, there were then two popes in the Vatican. There was Pope Benedict, and then there was Pope Francis from Argentina. And the thing was that he didn't leave the Vatican. Pope Benedict remained in the Vatican in a private apartment, almost as if he was acting as a spy on the inside, or acting as somebody who was trying to save the Holy See on the inside. So it's almost like Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, had tried to derail the prophecy by saving Rome. Rather than him taking it down, he decided to leave too soon to create problems for the next guy, Francis, who was the first Jesuit ever to sit on on the Holy See, on the throne of St. Peter. And that was unprecedented too. And we know that Jesuits are almost like the CIA of the Vatican, of the Catholic Church more, and they don't always have the best relationships with the Holy See. So there was one more. There was some very interesting stuff that Cardinal Ratzinger. All popes choose their own name. Okay, and Saint Malachi said that he would be connected to olives, the glory of olives. Well, he deliberately named himself Saint. No, he's from Germany, and Germany's not a country associated with olives. Saint he deliberately named himself Saint Benedict which means the good work, or the Benedictine order, which is, I think, a Swiss monk order, and their symbol is an olive branch. So he was almost like he was deliberately trying to do something with the prophecy. He was aware of it, he believed it, and and this brings us to a story on the third secret of Fatima. He basically said that the third secret, it was a belief that it was the assassination of Pope John Paul II. That was actually the belief that some of them tried to take the Pope's life. But he said he didn't believe that, because he didn't believe there's a fatalism in that, and it could be changed, and if prophecy could be disrupted. And there he goes about, and then he starts not disrupting, but trying to alter St. Malachi's prophecy in order to save the Holy See. So this is like unbelievably interesting stuff when you start getting into it. Now, is this guy Pope Francis evil? I don't like him, I can tell you that. He was telling people that they had to get the needlecraft, that they wouldn't go to heaven. There's a video of him smacking a Chinese woman who tries to hold his hand, and he's one step away from allowing drag queens to dance in St. Peter's Square. He's like literally the worst kind of globalist. And then again, that does suit. And also, he would be called the flower of Rome or something like that. And apparently, his symbol is a flower among flowers. So the prophecy of St. Malachi is coming true, whether you want to believe it or not. It's coming true.
Right. It's interesting you say that about the flower, because he did say there was a demon walking through the Vatican that comes with flowers.
Now, that was Saint Francis who said that, or Pope Francis.
Pope Francis said that. Right. Yes, he said that
now,
this year.
Is that fear that the demon that he mentioned in the Vatican was the seeds of insurgency that Pope Benedict had sown before he died, by meeting with the cardinals one by one and saying, look, there's this prophecy by St. Malachi. This guy, Francis, by all accounts, could be a nasty piece of work that could damage us. And maybe the demon is a metaphor for the people trying to undermine his reign inside the papacy.
Yeah, possible. It's possible.
Yeah.
It is. And going back to that third prophecy of the Fatima, there was an interview published in 1984, in the 1984 edition of the Jesus magazine, and Cardinal Ratzinger was asked whether he'd read the text of the third secret and why it hadn't been revealed. And he acknowledged that he had in fact read the third secret, and stated that part of the secret involves the importance of something called novissimi, which talks about and discusses the end of matters pertaining to the world, or the end of an age, or the end of humanity, and dangers that threaten the faith and the life of the Christian church, and therefore that the end of the world. And he said that if it's not made public, at least for the time being, it's only in order to prevent religious prophecy from being mistaken as a quest for the sensational.
Yeah, and there he is, like messing with prophecy himself, probably.
Yeah. And Howard D., who was a former Philippine ambassador to the Vatican, he was also interviewed by a magazine publication called Inside the Vatican in 1998. And he claimed that Cardinal Ratzinger had personally confirmed to him that the messages of Akita and Fatima are essentially the same. And the Akita prophecy talks about the work of the devil and how it will infiltrate into the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals, and bishops going against bishops, and churches and altars sacked, and it'll just fall down.
You see, the thing with the Fatima prophecies, it's a weird one, and people, it's not as the story of Fatima is that the Virgin Mary appeared to these three children in the around the time of World War One, and told them that these three secrets are coming. Okay, and on the final day, you had the miracle of the sun, where 70,000 people had witnessed this miracle, where the sun danced in the sky and this strange substance fell from the sky, and communists who went there to mock the ceremony fell to their knees and started praying to the Virgin. Well, it's a weirder story than that. A few months before it happened, two newspapers, one in Lisbon and one in Porto, a spiritualist group had written a thing that something remarkable was about to happen in Portugal that would change the destiny of the world and Portugal. And it would be an event like no other. And that was published. They took out ads in newspapers in Porto and Lisbon saying this. So the three children who claimed, what happened was the three children who claimed to have seen the Virgin never said that he saw a virgin. In fact, what they saw was, and other people saw it too, was a small 3-foot tall being with no hair rotating like this.
Right.
Making a crackling noise. And as soon as it happened, the Jesuits were on the case and basically kidnapped the three children and told them to tell the world that they'd seen the Virgin Mary, and told them to tell the world and that their prophecies and what she said. And one of the things she said was that two of the children, Fernanda and the little girl, the other little girl, would not live longer, and that it was up to Lucia to actually present the prophecies. So what happened was those two children died almost instantly, which is very suspicious, in the hands of the Jesuits. And then soon after, she was instantly locked in a Carmelite nunnery, where basically she had no contact with the human race. And the Jesuits controlled all her dialogue with the outside world in the few times she was allowed to do it. So it seems to be that what happened at Fatima was a remarkable paranormal event that took place. And it is an interesting part of Portugal. It's an old area full of caves. It was part of the Islamic Caliphate, so it could be dealing with a jinn. And the Jesuits took control and made up this story that it was about the Virgin Mary, when there was no mention of the Virgin Mary in any of it. It was just something they had dovetailed into the narrative. Took control of the myth, and may have even forged the three secrets for themselves as part of this, to keep the mythology that was about the Virgin Mary going. But anyway, so even that's a dodgy one. And going by St. Francis' essay on Fatima, you do get that impression that he has great sympathy for Lucia and the other two children, as if to say they were manipulated, and that we shouldn't take that prophecies too seriously without stepping on the Jesuits' toes completely.
Wow, that's something. I mean, the Fatima prophecies, they weren't really something that I didn't know much about them, and to be honest with you, and I read them. I've been reading about them this week, and for me reading them, they also seemed a little bit like propaganda machines as well, because the second one, I think, blamed Russia, blaming Russia for the state of the world, and it would be the thing that we have to watch.
Yeah, and they would return to the church and all this, and all. There was another thing too, that Portugal was on the verge of becoming a Soviet itself. There was tremendous political turmoil in Portugal during the time of the prophecies. So it became a handy kind of silver bullet to get the Portuguese to go back to the churches and get propaganda out about the Russians and the communists and all this stuff. Yeah. You're right. It is. It's too political. Why would the mother of Jesus Christ concern herself with globalization back in 1917? And you see, this is the Jesuits. This is the Jesuits, right? Why would a being from heaven be concerned with politics on earth?
First question I asked myself when I read it: why would she be concerned with that, and why would she want to scare the life out of three young children with the graphic stuff that she explains in these 3 prophecies.
And to tell 2 of them, and by name Fernanda and the other little girl, that they would not survive.
Yeah, doesn't sound very Christian to me.
Or loving or compassionate, and then they do die. God knows what was done to those poor kids. If they were poisoned or beaten to death or whatever.
Yeah.
But the Jesuits also took control of Saint Bernadette in France, in previous Marian apparition. So, Ratzinger, it's almost like we're having the final showdown between the throne of Saint Peter, the Holy See, and the Jesuits, represented by the 2 popes in the Vatican at the same time.
Yeah. And
also there was some financial scandals but they were very small relatively. The Office of Religious Works, which is commonly known as the Vatican Bank, did have some corruption problems in 2008 and 9. Not corruption, but dodgy investment deals that went bad and things like that. But they were peanuts compared to what was happened in the 60s and the 70s with Roberto Calvi and that whole period of God's banker and all that stuff. But they tried to sex that up into a big, huge scandal, but it wasn't a major scandal. A lot of banks lost money through bad investments in 2008. But you see, that's also why the Vatican Bank was also the reason why the black nobility lost its power within the papacy. People think the black nobility is this big kind of spooky, eyes wide shut kind of thing. No, they were just wealthy family benefactors who used to, through history, they were only called the black nobility from the 1840s on. Before that, they were just known as wealthy families. If the Vatican was in trouble, they bailed it out. They provided money, they provided help, and you see that all through history, even down to like people who are the tailors to the popes, or the artwork to the Pope or anything. They're all from families. They're very much, the papacy is very much involved with long lineages of Italian families, and not just wealthy ones, working class ones as well that work in the Vatican and things like that. But the black nobility families are basically, the bloodlines have all died out by the 1960s or had no power anymore. And that's in Vatican II. Pope Paul the 26th, I think it was, Pope Paul anyway, when he drafted Vatican II, basically removed the power of the black nobility in the Vatican. So he didn't need him anymore. And the reason for that was Roberto Calvi had reformed the Office of Religious Works, the Vatican Bank, and suddenly they were very financially solvent. So they didn't need these outside benefactors anymore. It's just such interesting stuff when you get into it. But now we're at a situation where the Jesuits and the Holy See are probably having a showdown inside the Vatican right now.
Right.
And when Pope Francis talks about demons, what is he really talking about? Is it a personal threat to him and the Jesuits, or is it a threat to the papacy?
It reminds me of something else. I just want to bring something else into the mix, if that's all right.
Sure, of course.
Speaking of the Vatican and prophecies and the 2 popes and the prophecy of the Antichrist Pope, and that's Nostradamus. And I've taken 2 quatrains of Nostradamus's from the book Conversations with Nostradamus by Dolores Cannon. And these quatrains talk about the popes and the Vatican. And the translations are from Dolores's book, in which she claimed to be in contact with Nostradamus via time travel using past life regression clients via the subconscious. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show. That's a whole other topic in itself. But for now, I just want to read you the 2 quatrains from Nostradamus, along with his own interpretations of them through Dolores's conversations with him, because they tie in perfectly to what we've just been talking about. I've got them here. So bear with me, because these things aren't the easiest things to read. But the first one, I've taken 2 of them, and the first one says, the 10th day of the April calends, calculated in Gothic fashion, is revised again by the wicked people. The fire is put out, and the diabolic gathering seek the bones of the demon of Celis. Now, according to Dolores Cannon, Nostradamus says this quatrain has to do with the destruction of the church during the times of troubles. It refers to the church and the battle within itself. And there will be a pope that would be assassinated by his own kind, and this will be hidden, and it will give power to the last pope. This is the interesting bit. The pope will be killed by a poison that will be absorbed into his blood and bones, and it will be a special kind of poison that attacks the central nervous system and skeletal system, which will make it look like a heart attack or a stroke. This is how they will present his death to the world. And in this way, the last Pope of Rome, the last Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, will come into power. Now that just set the needlecraft in my mind, a special poison that creates strokes or heart attacks.
And then he was the Pope who said, take it if you want to get into heaven.
Yeah.
Which is unprecedented. There's never been a Pope in history that's ever said anything like that, ever. And he's a total globalist right down the middle. And yeah, I do believe that Benedict was the last Pope, the proper. But I do think that he tried to, in his final days living in that papal apartment in the Vatican, tried to derail, because he's obviously, from his writings on Fatima, he did not believe that you were faith to prophecy. That prophecy could be undermined if you knew it was coming, which actually is very plausible when you think about it. But and so we don't know what seeds that man sowed. He could even be saving the human race for all we know in his final days, and so we're living in amazing times. We're living in possibly, the age of the end of the popes and everything, where prophecies come to fulfillment. And here we go again. We have the Kali Yuga, we have Ragnarok, we have the prophecy of the babe in the Irish Celtic mythology, and now we even have Catholic prophecy. Now we are living in a remarkable time, and that's like I think that's why I want to concentrate more on ontology and 40 and this kind of thing, because I think that's a very useful software to shift your consciousness to get through what we're seeing before us, because all the previous rule books have been ripped up, and we're living in a time that the material sciences are not going to help us. In fact, they're going to probably destroy us if they can. And we can see that with the needlecraft and everything else. But interesting days ahead. So did you have any opinions on Pope Benedict before he died, or did you only learn this recently?
I didn't, to be fair. I stay away from the Vatican and things like that. But I have to say, this week's been absolutely fascinating reading about it. And it's actually going to read one of the books that you recommended in one of your videos, In God's Name, by David Yallop. That's now on my to be read list, because it's a rabbit hole and I've gone down it. And
it's very interesting. And I would also tell people to check out the film that's on Beyond Room 313, called the one about Roberto Calvi. I forgot the name of it. Not by any means necessary. It's something like that. The time for action, and that's about Roberto Calvi and the Vatican Bank. And there's a lot of interesting information pertaining to that here. But it's almost like Roberto Calvi hanging on Blackfriars Bridge in London, was the opening act of a saga or a play or a story that's now coming to completion with the current carry on with Pope Francis, and having two popes up until very recently, both in the Vatican proper. And so this is like the closing chapter of that.
Yeah, it is a fascinating topic, and I'm glad that we've discussed it this week, and because it's given me the opportunity to look into it now and learn something.
That was
something really important.
That was a fantastic interjection, no pun intended, about the needlecraft, and mentioned in the Notre Dame's prophecy in relation to the final Antichrist Pope. And that's what I'll always remember about this Pope Francis guy, is that awful decree that he gave about the needlecraft. It was almost like that was the end. He right there and then he showed that he was the enemy. he was against natural law in every way possible.
Yeah.
But
I do have one more, if you don't mind, one more quatrain from Nostradamus that ties in nicely to.
I'd be great to have 10 more. So go on, don't be. Go
Yeah, I've
ahead.
got one more. This one talks about the fall of the Vatican, the final days of the Vatican. So, O great Rome, your ruin draws near, not of your walls, but of your blood and substance. The harsh one in letters will make so horrid a notch pointed steel, wounding up to the sleeve. And again, according to Dolores Cannon, Nostradamus says that this quatrain tells of the Vatican being uncovered, and humanity discovers that the Vatican formed its own hierarchy to control and manipulate man by inventing rules and laws and making people believe they were the laws of God, which they were not. The Vatican will fall, and the harsh one with letters is a person who will come with spoken word, with written word, and with documented proof, and will make it public so it cannot be hidden anymore. Now, Benedict's personal assistant has a tell-all book that he's trying to get released about the corruption within the Vatican, and that
Yeah, you see,
the man that's wrote that book was his personal assistant, aide, and best friend for over 30 years.
yeah, see, people think that when Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan, that one day you had the Roman Empire and then the next day you had the Vatican. It didn't happen like that. It took hundreds and hundreds of years for them to try and build the Vatican, the Holy See, upon the ruins of the Roman Empire. It didn't happen overnight, and the fact that it took so long, and you like in 1000 A.D. you had Pope Sylvester on the throne, and he was ripped asunder by a demon on an altar while he was saying mass, and he was an occultist. He was actually a cultist called Gilbert, who actually stole magic books from the Muslims in Cordoba and was a practicing magician. Now, he was from a black nobility family as well. So they, even in 1000 AD, you're talking about like what, 700 years after Constantine the Great, they still, the whole thing was still a mess. It wasn't until nearly post-Reformation that it really began to stabilize. It took probably the better part of 1,000 years or a little more for it to become pagan Rome, imperial empire, Vatican. Now, this is another possibility. Maybe the fall of the Vatican could mean the resurgence of pagan Rome. And that's what they could mean by the destruction. Do you remember in recent years, I only heard about the Pachamama statue, there was a statue of Pachamama that was placed inside a church in Rome, pagan, South American pagan goddess. And it was taken by someone who threw it in the river, in the Tiber. And he was a member of the black nobility family, apparently. And this is what the Vatican, when it started, spent years throwing the pagan statues of the gods, Apollo and so on, into the Tiber. That's where they all came from. When they dug them out, there's still loads down there. And that was almost like a symbolic moment that the battle had begun between pagan Rome and Christian Rome. So again, front row seat to this incredible stuff we have.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get more amazing. And
There is,
Hocus Focus will be here to like document this,
yes.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And learn. And, I'm learning new things as well. And
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody watching as well are going to gain something from future episodes. There is one more thing I want to just address with Ratzingers before we wrap it up, because I know it's going to come up in the comments at some point. So I just want to address it here. Ratzinger's family, especially his father, bitterly resented the Nazis, and his father's opposition to the Nazism resulted in demotions and harassment of the family. And following his 14th birthday, Ratzinger was conscripted into the Hitler Youth, and membership was actually required by law for all 14-year-old German boys after March 1939. But he was an unenthusiastic member, and he refused to attend meetings. And
Yeah,
according to his brother, Ratzinger's brother, in 1941, one of his cousins was a 14-year-old boy with Down syndrome. He was taken away by the Nazi regime and murdered during the Action T4 campaign of the
yeah,
Nazi eugenics.
right to life, right
Yeah,
to exist laws. Do you know that was actually stopped by Catholics in Bavaria? They used to surround homes with Down syndrome people in them, or asylums, and disabled people, and stop the SS from actually carrying out the murders. And that actually stopped. That was actually a successful campaign against the Nazis. And Catholic papers in the 1930s were saying, if the Third Reich aren't stopped now, they'll be killing Jews next. And so they were aware. The Catholic Church played in Germany itself, particularly in Bavaria, played a heroic role in standing up. In fact, Heinrich Reinhardt, who was an absolute bastard of a Nazi, he was the governor of Bavaria and Bohemia. He was an absolute, a fanatic, a nasty piece of work. He was assassinated by Czech resistance during the war. He was the one who told them to stand down the whole eugenic program, because he knew that the Vatican needed the support of German Catholics. So they thought that, like, for politically and diplomatic reasons. There was also the Reich Concordat, which was signed in 1934, which between Pope Louis and I think it was Pope Louis and the Vatican and the Third Reich, where they said the Vatican would not interfere in the Reich, and the Reich would not interfere into the lives of Catholics in Germany. And it was because of Catholics using that Concordat that they prevented this absolute bastard Heinrich Reinhardt from actually carrying out the full eugenics program, and saved thousands and thousands of people with Down syndrome and other disabilities. So you hear these things about no one stood up against the Third Reich when they were coming to power, other than the communists. But the Catholic Church tried and did, but not with the blessing of the Pope. And there's a reason for this, that the Pope, who was the Pope during the war, was actually a cardinal, or no, he was the papal nuncio in Munich, and apparently had an affair with his housekeeper, a woman, and the actual SS had uncovered this and used it to blackmail him. It just goes on and on and on. Okay, well, that was a great segment. I hope everyone enjoyed that. And again, the comments down below, what to do and what to add to this. This is an interactive discussion regarding this show. And now, Sarah, I loved the one last week, and here we go again with this week's psychic hygiene.
Okay, so it's that time of the show where I just give you some tips and advice on how to keep your psychic health in tip-top condition. And it's important to know that we must move our bodies. It's really important for psychic health, and it's as important for your psychic health as it is for your physical health. If you don't move your body regularly, then energy gets stuck and it eventually becomes stagnant. So moving the body loosens all that and releases it. So if you've been in a place that's left you feeling low, you've had a bad day at work, you've been around the supermarket, well, we all know what that's like, or you've just been in somebody's company who's left you feeling drained, go somewhere private and move. Shake, jump, skip, dance, do whatever it is that gets the whole of your body moving. My favourite is to dance to a good record. Record, can you say record? And we are old school, aren't we? A good record. You get a double whammy then anyway, because the music makes you feel good and you're moving to shift that stagnant, stuck energy from you. And my dogs could tell you a few funny stories because they're the only ones who get to see me doing it. So, in the words of that fab disco tune by the Jacksons, shake your body down to the ground. And that's the psychic hygiene tip for this week. It's easy, it doesn't cost you anything, and it's so simple, and it'll make you feel great.
Well, thank you for that, Sarah. That was brilliant. And I totally agree. And I'll tell you what my thing is: air guitar. I'm a very much an advocate of the air guitar, and my thing has always been that, and air drumming. They're actually two instruments I play in real life, so they make me feel, that helps me shake that mojo, bad mojo out of me,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, that's when you were young and you would do air guitar with your tennis racket in front of the mirror in your bedroom. That was because you were young and full of joy, and you should never lose that. I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, great tip. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
and if you're feeling it, get the hairbrush out and go and get in front of the mirror. Pretend like it's 1985.
exactly. Well, we all, I think we're all instinctually doing it, but you're right. I never thought about it actually helping with the psychic energy. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Sarah.
The new inn was situated on Mottram Road in Hattersley. There may have been an inn on the site since the 1600s, and it was known as the Highwayman's Inn. There are lots of tales of it being haunted by a ghost named Mary. W.F. Grattan was the landlord of the inn in the 1920s, and in a newspaper interview of the time, he told how he and his wife had been regularly disturbed with footsteps outside the pub and by crates and barrels being moved around in the back of his inn without anyone visible moving them. He also said on a number of occasions, cars and a petrol wagon parked on the road outside would begin to move down the road on their own, while their owners were still sat in the pub. During the same period of the 1920s and 30s, a phantom lorry manifested along the same road where the new inn stood. There were a series of accidents allegedly caused by the sudden appearance of the phantom lorry. Between 1927 and 1930, there were 16 accidents at the spot in which cars, bikes and pedestrians were involved. I wonder if these spooky happenings were an augury to the goings-on in a certain house behind the pub 30 years later. The New Inn pub became the local of Moore's murderers Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, whose house on Wardlebrook Avenue was behind the inn. Brady and Hindley were Britain's most notorious serial killers, and the Moore's murders were a series of crimes that shocked Britain when they first came to light. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley murdered 5 children during 1963 and 1964 and buried their bodies on Saddleworth Moor near Manchester in the north of England. It's believed there may have been many more victims that have never come to light. In 1964, Moore's murderers Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were rehoused in Hattersley, where they lived in a then newly built council house on Wardlebrook Avenue. It was at that house where they claimed the last 2 of 5 victims, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey and 17-year-old Edward Evans. Following their arrest in 1966, the house stood empty for over 20 years until it was eventually demolished in 1987. Today there is a space where the house once stood. The years have passed and Hindley and Brady are now both dead. But for the families of the victims and the people of Hattersley and the surrounding areas, it has left an open wound that will never heal and a severe psychic imprint within the area. This is Sara Mondaini reporting from Wardlebrook Avenue in Hattersley, Greater Manchester. So that was my report from the site of our old haunted pub, backing onto the street where the Moore's murderers lived and drank.
And people, if you have, I've already in discussion with a few people that are going to make us their own local report for the show. And so if you have want to make a 5-minute video about something interesting, sporty in your area, and you'd like it to use it to promote your YouTube channel, we'd be glad to show it. provided it's interesting enough and it covers something good. But yeah, so yeah, I'm loving these outside reports, and I think I'd love it if we had two or three of them during the whole show. We probably will at some point. Well, the final segment of the show this week is about something that's been bothering me for a while, and I think a lot of people are puzzled by it. It seems so strangely debased and sordid and weird and increasingly horrid as time progresses. And it's the fashion industry. What exactly is the fashion industry at this point in history? You look at the whole recent saga around Balenciaga, how you say it?
I just say Balenciana. That's,
Balenciaga.
yeah.
We've seen the recent very disturbing events around Balenciaga, and you see that company, like so many of them, but that one in particular used to produce the most beautiful clothes back in the day. They were the design house of the Grace Kellys and the Audrey Hepburns. They were very beautiful, elegant, high fashion. And how did it go from that to these sordid uh, promotional shots that's apparently seem to be endorsing minor attracted person type behavior and grooming even. So
Yeah.
the final topic is this week is Karanzon on the catwalk. What do you think about this, Sarah?
Well, the fashion industry is notorious for being glamorous and all about partying. And the models and the designers and stylists, they're all portrayed as having these high flying lives that many of us only dream about. And everything at the surface is shiny and full of sequins and glitter, and it's very superficial. But when you scratch the surface of that, only a little bit, you start to see the sweatshops, the slavery, anorexia, body dysmorphia, and drug abuse. And not to mention things like poor self-esteem, bad representation, and this pressure to stay skinny and waif-like. And it interested me because going back to the 90s, girl power in the 90s saw many of those supermodels photographed by the tabloids on a Sunday evening, showing this array of drugs and booze-fueled parties of depravity falling on the floor or in and out of taxis, with that inevitable tabloid money shot up the skirt while they were falling in and out of the limousines. And it was coupled with another trend at the time called the heroin chic. And it was a look within the industry, which grew to be this whole new culture in the 90s. And it was a look, a trend, and it was all about being pale, having sharp bone structure, a skinny frame, and dark circles under the eyes. And I remember Kate Moss and Jodie Kidd and people like Drew Barrymore were put on show in this heroin chic, and the world accepted it as not only normal, but glamorous and something to emulate and aspire to. And this heroin chic trend of making drugs seem cool, to me, seemed like it was the Pied Piper playing his merry pipe once again to the very impressionable minds and bringing in new customers perhaps to the drug cartels, as well as breaking down the society. And when you look back in history to what we know now, this breaking down of the society and getting into people's minds is like a marathon and not a sprint. So I was reading about the fashion industry, obviously, for some research for the show, and I read some terrible accounts from models, and many reporting that they're often expected to shoot for free in photographers' homes to build up their portfolios, casting in hotel rooms with predatory clients. And some models have even reported having the drinks spiked by the photographer and being heavily pressured to pose sexually with other models. And a lot of it's covered in a book called The Model Manifesto by a lady called Leanne Maskell. And it's an A to Z of anti-exploitation for the fashion industry. So it's an anti-exploitation manual if you're thinking of going into the fashion industry. Now, if we go a little bit deeper than the slavery and the drugs and the body dysmorphia and all that goes with it, and we go a bit deeper and have a look at what could be behind this industry, again, is it the same non-human consciousness that has infiltrated the many institutions of the so-called modern world today? When we look now, we've got these ridiculous non-human looking outfits being paraded as normal, and the audiences at these fashion shows are sitting there applauding them and looking at us like we're the weird ones for thinking that something stinks. But is this demonic looking, crazy, circus like outfits that they're pushing out there, is this the 2023 version of what was heroin chic back in the 90s, and we're just accepting it and we're not questioning it, but it's going deeper and darker as the years go on? So what are your thoughts?
Well, my initial thoughts about the weird, bizarre, entities you see on the catwalk and how they're dressed and what the ridiculous outfits they put them in, they'll never be in any store for sale. They'll never be on the high street. They'll never make any money. And so I just assumed for the longest time. Now it may be 2023, but this nonsense has been going on for a long time now. I can remember Joan Collins back in the 90s said that she would never go to London Fashion Week ever again because the outfits are increasingly ridiculous and they make the models look like idiots, particularly the male ones. And she says, I'm not going to support it. And that was back in the 90s. So it's been going on a long time now. And I just assumed, like the modern art business, it was a money laundering a money laundering scam. So you could basically, someone could pay a designer a huge amount of money to put up this bizarre show at London Fashion Week or New York Fashion Week or Milan or Paris, whatever. And at the end of it, everyone would pocket all the money that was being laundered and the dirty money was clean. So I think there's probably a big part of that. It's definitely in the modern art business. That's how it works. That's why your painting sell of it like a slap of paint on a canvas sells for 100 million. That's all money laundering, and that's all then double laundered again. Just to slightly go off topic, those paintings can be given as tax write-offs as endowments to the U.S. federal government if you live in America. So if you spend 100 million, say about 50 million on a dot on a painting canvas, then you go and you owe 100 million in taxes to the U.S. government. You can wipe it all clean by giving them this as a gift, an endowment. So there's a lot of this kind of funny nonsense going on, I think, in the fashion industry as well. But it seemed more, and I do remember that heroin chic thing. They looked like they were Auschwitz survivors. In fact, the main company, I can't remember which one it was, that used to always photograph them all like wearing barely, the boys were always just wearing trousers basically, and they were like skinny as anything, and they all looked like Auschwitz survivors. And that was I remember, like, I think it was Obsession, one of those perfumes was really pushing that look for their models. And it wasn't just clothes, it was big into the perfume stuff as well. And the things became more grotesque and dark. And even if it is a money laundering scam, what makes a designer get a man and dress him up as a giant teddy bear or whatever with "please kill me" embroidered on his jumper? What makes them do these bizarre, they're almost like burlesquing humiliation rituals of the models. So there's some kind of psychic harvesting going on there. One, by us watching this stuff going, what the hell is that? What am I looking at? And you're annoyed by it because this is what fashion is. Well, that's a classic, that could be a sign of entities behind all this because they're harvesting your energy by being pissed off at it. The second one is that the burlesquing or the humiliation of the models is harvesting energy for possibly the people inside it. Now, again, there's wickedness at the root of it. Sweatshops, you'll have some designer have a show with all these burlesque models, and they make they'll make a statement at the end and go, oh, climate change or whatever, save the whales. And yet these people are just living off like appalling conditions in Chinese and Indians and Pakistani sweatshops. And so it's more than just shallow and superficial. There's something dark going on. And I thought that this trend of these mad outfits and mad shows would have died off about 3 or 4 years ago, but it hasn't. It has. The gaslighting has actually gotten worse. I saw one recently of a guy stumbling up a flight of steps, dressed like he was the COVID virus or something like that, and almost like a mockery of us and the whole thing. And again, you look at the connection of these designers. They're in there with the globalists. They're in there with the top politicians. They're personal friends with all the other monsters who make our lives as difficult as possible. So I'm of the belief now that some of these, by default, but maybe by design, that some of these shows that you get at London Fashion Week and Milan Fashion Week and Paris Fashion Week are actual rituals for the invocation of the babbling Choronzon. Now, what's Choronzon associated with? Babbling, confusion, distortion, obfuscation, throwing things off target, confusing you so you cannot make a correct decision. Yeah, babble, babble, babble. You can always tell a chronzonic infected individual because they will just babble. They don't say nothing. It's just noises, and increasingly bizarre and obnoxious noises as they continue. Well, these are the visual version of that. They're, and you see how many young models die of cancer, and then drug die. A lot of them die young, and a lot of them have been in accidents, and there's been some very funny, dodgy stuff as well, murders of models and stuff like that. And so there is definitely a growing choronzonic infection within this thing. And by default, these fashion shows have become masses of Choronzon to the point where that's what we're watching at the moment. And I really do believe that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, because we sit there scratching our head, looking at them, thinking, what? And it's confusion, because you think, why? Why we sat watching this? And the audience, the audience fascinated me. That video that you were talking about of that high-heeled costume that was stumbling around, I shared that on Facebook today, and I was watching that, and it was the audience that fascinated me as well. They were just zombie-like. They were all masked up and zombie-like, just staring, and no emotion, nothing, and almost like they were hypnotized.
And the most horrible people are involved in that industry. They're like they're not nice people. They're not, I mean, I worked in the garment, not in the businesses, but I worked in an office in the garment district in New York. And they were like they just see some of these people, they were ridiculous. And they're incredibly nasty and appalling and dislikable people. And the school, the Cooper Union, the college in Manhattan, where where you would study design, where a particular type of obnoxious rich kid went to that school, unless they got a scholarship. So it's almost like a way for people with money with no talent to pretend they have creativity.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of that as well.
Do you think that industry attracts those types of people, or do you think that industry turns them into that kind of person?
See, I don't know enough about it. While there's lots of girls and women who start out making beautiful clothes and really love designing their these new ranges of clothes, and they may be perfectly happy having a small shop somewhere, and that's just someone who's following their dharma in life as a creator. But in order to get on the catwalks, that's another thing. It's predominantly gay men who are these designers. It's predominantly gay men burlesquing heterosexual women. I don't know what that's about, but I definitely feel that there's an element of almost like misogyny there. And and they also don't treat the models well. Now, they pay them lots of money, and they can say to them, well, what are you on about? I paid the models are paid huge amounts and they are paid very good money for doing this. But what price your soul? It's almost like they're saying, you know, if these Quranic infected things are saying, what price your soul? You know, and they all seem to come from wealthy families. They're, you know, it's not just that they're gay men, they're the straight ones too, straight women. They're all seem to come from wealthy families. They don't seem to come from poverty or any middle, you know, it's the I'm not aware of any too many stories of someone who had a Singer sewing machine in their living room and started designing clothes and ended up in Paris Fashion Week. They seem to be a lot of them either minor aristocrats or from the establishment, and they're the ones who have this Qurans on a catwalk opened up before them and given the breaks. So that's interesting too. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them tend to be German, and a lot of them tend to be from Prussian nobility and things like that. So that's even interesting, you know. And the nature of it seems profound. I could imagine sitting in that room you're just talking about, the people watching it and going, I can't imagine the energy in that room being anything but extremely toxic
Yeah.
and intimidating.
And what goes on afterwards, because I'm sure at the end of these shows they have some kind of after party or some kind of event,
Yep,
networking event. What goes on there? What must go on there?
huge amounts of drugs and God knows what else. I'm sure a lot of those models have to actually ever expected to prostitute themselves in order to get on that catwalk.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of that goes on, you know, and you may have very innocent young men and women who are just been told that you can make some money being a model, and they say, "Oh, great, I can make some money being a model," and then they find themselves in this horrific world.
Yeah.
Like there's another thing too. Do you remember when all those models like Naomi Campbell and Helena, what was her name, and
Is it?
she was Danish. She was
Mm-hmm.
going out with Michael Hutchins for years,
Yeah.
and all those types that they remember they had this thing called the Supermodels Cafe. Do you remember that?
No,
They had a chain of restaurants called these, you know, like it's supposed to be like the Hard Rock Cafe, because at this point models were like becoming like rock stars. Do you remember that? There was a point in the early 90s where these models were actually like being treated like rock stars or movie stars.
I
They were getting
remember.
that.
I remember in the early 90s there was lots of models appearing in music videos.
Yeah, but they were also celebrities themselves, like big time. You know, it was almost like they were the rock stars of their day. And it was a point in music where the kind of like the rock star kind of vanished, and then you had all it moved into fashion, and you had like Naomi Campbell and that woman Helene or whatever her name is, and all others, you know, Christy Brinkley, loads of them, and they all became like just more than models; they were stars. So there was this thing called the Supermodel Cafe, which they'd opened in various cities, and the one in New York was on Fifth Avenue, and I used to walk by it coming home from work. And it was like overpriced drinks and everything, this kind of thing. And it was full of nothing but ugly women. I hate to say it like that, but it was full of nothing but ugly women who thought that they could be transformed almost psychologically by going into the supermodel cafe and getting and drinking a gin and tonic under a picture of Naomi Campbell. And I
Right.
remember thinking that was that. It's like this is like now they have a church. Now they actually have that business failed eventually. Quite rightly, it was a stupid idea, but that's how odd it is.
Yeah, very. And I wonder how much it costs for a gin and tonic in there.
On Fifth Avenue in New York, probably God knows, even then it was probably huge. Yeah,
Wow. And what's interested me with the models is the way that they get recruited, because you have these agents or model agencies going out and about, certainly in this country, in the shopping arcades and just waiting for a suitable face to come past, and then that's how what's her name, Kate Moss, got discovered, isn't it?
yeah, but we only know about her. How many were just they you know they have to pay for their own photographs and everything. They don't get that for free, and there's a lot of exploitation, particularly of working class girls, who are very easily seduced. Like, oh, I'm going to be a model, this kind of thing, and it's some dirtbag who's just kind of just basically fishing for young girls, and they get their parents to pay for the photo shoots and everything. It's really it's a pretty nasty thing, that. And it's like the soccer, like one kid goes through out of 100,000, and he might play for Manchester United or Barcelona, but you never heard about the 999,000 who didn't make it. And it's the same thing with the models. That when they're fishing for these girls, most of them will never ever get anywhere near a designer catwalk. And again, that's an energy harvesting thing as well, isn't it? Sacrificing virgins almost, because they approach them when they're very young.
Yes, and they don't know any better, and they're easily manipulated and gaslighted almost to believe that they're going to be going into this life. Groomed, yeah, that's the word. Yeah, so it's very predatory.
And they do it with boys too as well. And there's another thing too, there's almost like an alchemical element of it too in recent times. Now, while we've always had gender bending, we had, like, I grew up on Bowie and things like that. And that was to do with music. That was rock and roll. That was part of the show and the performance. Now, when you have someone like Harry Styles holding a handbag and wearing a frilly frock, like, Hyacinth bucket or something, there's nothing cool or interesting about that. He's been told to have this kind of effect on people. Again, there's nothing cool about these guys having a handbag. Nothing at all. Nothing. And it's not born out of their creative lives as artists or anything like that. It's purely some fashion house makes them into a tool to sell things. And they're absolutely the opposite of cool. They couldn't be more uncool. By doing this. But yeah, we're told that, like, it's like, oh wow, it's really challenging gender norms. I'm sorry, David Bowie was doing that 50 years ago. Don't be telling me this is a new thing. And it's not. It's just another way that they can try and sell their rubbish to fellas, to gullible guys. And fortunately, I don't know any guys who are stupid enough to buy handbags. But there was like there's an alchemical nature to this, that the fusing of the male and female and the androgyny. Androgyny is so. I've seen pictures of girls at these events, and you wouldn't know they were girls. They had no boobs. You wonder if they were on hormone blockers, and then this becomes now what's happening in real life. It's almost like transferred into real life now. Excuse me, and that's what's happening now. So it's almost like it was a kind of a chemical wedding, the creation of the sacred hermaphrodite. And you wonder almost if a part of this is that are they deliberately destroying the fashion industry now, to killing it completely. And this is almost part of a destruction ritual, because they're showing no signs at all of pulling the plug on this madness. I can guarantee you next year's Fashion Week, whatever cities it's in, will be just as nuts, if not even more.
Yeah.
There's a strange kind of like mad, it's almost like it's a spell or a hex or a grimoire that they can't do the closing right on it. And so it's taken on a life of its own. And there's no closing right on this thing. And it's only going to get more surreal. It's as bad as it is now. It's only going to get more surreal. And I can't believe a human consciousness could sit there and design this stuff. I think it's coming from somewhere else. That's not a human mind. That they're so distorted. These things, they look like harmonious Bosch paintings or something.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. No sane decent human being would design something like that. When you look back at Balenciaga's elegant clothing to what we've got now, I don't know when it changed and became like this, at what point on the timeline that was, but it's a million miles away from what it used to be.
Yes, and now this is quite worrying, because if the androgyny that they had, say, in the 80s and 90s, has led us to the world we live in now, where school kids are being told they don't really have a gender and stuff like that. I do worry when I see the Balenciaga thing of the pedophile stuff. Are they getting ready? Is this the next magic ritual to generate this into reality. And this is why we have to, I was delighted to see how people stood up against this and fought against it, because they've obviously unleashed that ritual too soon. But I know the more I think about that Valenciana photo shoot, it's more like, seems like it was some kind of gaslighting magic ritual almost. Maybe not deliberate, but instinctive. Or these types of minds are possessed by something to do that. But it's like, it's the darkness of it is shocking. And it all began with the waifs and all that stuff back in the 90s. Because if you look at the models that they had in the 1970s, they're all beautiful, buxom girls with tons of hair, whether they were British or American or European, whatever, they were all goddesses. And then that lasted all through the 80s. I think Christy Brinkley was the last one. And then we got the waifs. And now we're kind of like living in a waif kind of reality, an androgynous reality. So it's like the old thing that Crowley said: every conscious act that you do is a magical act. So you better learn to do it properly. And I believe that the fashion industry has become an unconscious black magic act that they haven't learned to do properly. I don't know if it's real or not, but I do believe there's definitely entities and what. Look, if you're not a heroin addict so much, but if you're an alcoholic, and a lot of them are alcoholics, that's a classic walk-in thing, you know. So especially if you're starving yourself and you have no nutrition, this kind of thing to make yourself really skinny, that's what that creates a lack of movement, like you were saying with your psychic energy. So it makes you walk in material. And you look at these people and in these fashion week events, you look at their faces and their body language, and they're completely devoid of spirit. I bet you noticed that too in that video.
Absolutely, yeah, soulless, sort of vapid, nothing. It's just like they're walking zombies. And yes, they've got human bodies and skin and whatnot, but it's not them. It's not human that's controlling them. I think they just get up, go through the motions, do what they need to do, and goodness knows what's going on in here or what's behind it. What do you call it? What do you call it when you're dead inside, but you're animated? I can't think what that's called.
Zombified.
So there's something moving you, but you're dead. Yes.
Inertia. I don't know, but that I would say to people that pay attention to the fashion industry, because there's more in the kind of black magic world going on than that.
Here's an interesting thought. The fashion industry is, if it's so infiltrated with this demonic evil, this evil, and then the clothes that are coming out and going into the shops, we're wearing them. Are we, is that affecting our psyche?
Good question. It depends on what your relationship with it is. If you see teenage girls who have to get a piece of fashion that they see all their friends wear, and there's some boys as well, they often are possessed, aren't they? Oh, ma'am, all my friends are wearing this dress. It's only €100. Oh, everyone I know has it. Can you have a? You get that a lot.
Yeah.
That's a kind of possession, isn't it? But if it's just regular clothes, then you're not bothered by it.
Not bothered by it.
When you have a psychic coupling onto it.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the sweatshops. It's almost like an entanglement.
Yeah, I don't think so, because it's like when you buy clothes from secondhand stores or charity shops, they usually clothes belong to dead people, and you're not like you don't have a ghost inside them, that kind of thing. So it depends on your mentality towards it, your attitude towards it. I think like if you're obsessed, I have to get this handbag, I have to get this pair of shoes, I have to get this hairstyle, I have to have it because everyone has it. I think you're quantum entangled with the darkness of it. Mm-hmm. But if it's just someone who says, I need a jumper or I need a pair of trousers, and you just buy them, well, then that wave function collapses and you're not. So you wouldn't have any effect to it. But you wouldn't be if you had a passion towards it or a fascination.
Yeah, then that item of clothing would own you, really, wouldn't it? If you're buying it because you have to have it.
And you're part of that energetic stream that goes right back to the misery of some poor woman in Pakistan behind a Singer sewing machine.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is where the part of the show where Sarah and I recommend books that have been big influences on us. And Sarah went last week first time, so I'll go this week. I'll go first. And the book that I'm about to recommend is The Occult in Russia and the Soviet Union, which is not by Bernice Rosenthal. She actually just edited it. But what this book is a compilation and a very interesting story behind it. In 1990, literally as the Soviet Union collapsed, for some strange reason, many of the top universities in the United States, as well sponsored by the Soros Foundation, raided the occult records of the Soviet Union in the same way they raided the occult records of the Third Reich at the end of World War II. And there was a smash and grab raid on all public institutions that had worked in the occult, everything from remote viewing to basically anything to do with the occult of Russia, but also very interestingly, cosmism. Now, cosmism was the only kind of spiritual tradition left in the Soviet Union that was legal in a sense. And cosmism was a belief that there was no spiritual forces on the planet Earth. There was no life after death. There was no paranormal, but there was an outer space. And the Soviet space program, either by means of sending cosmonauts and rockets into space or by means of radio telescopes, could contact the dead ancestors and have spiritual experiences in outer space. And there was a film made in Russia in the 70s called Solaris, which was remade in the 90s with George Clooney. And it was about a Russian Soviet cosmonaut who encounters his dead wife in outer space. This was the element of cosmism. There's a lot of that covered in The Occult in Russia and the Soviet Union by Bernice Rosenthal. Well, she edited it, but there's so much more. This is where I discovered that the word Chernobyl is the Ukrainian version of abracadabra in Ukrainian folk magic. Yeah, I know it means wormwood and all that stuff, but it's actually used as an invocation for abracadabra, and it's in here. That's where I found that out. There's also excellent stories on the history of Russian folk and Slavic magic, and Ukrainian folklore traditions, and also individuals involved in it. And it goes back to the great age of navigation with Peter the Great, and how the Soviet Academy of Sciences were obsessed with things like clairvoyance, telecommunication, telekinesis, and other things like that. But this book was unique when it came out, isn't that it didn't just deal with that kind of Fortean stuff, but delved very deeply into the hardcore occult and studies into the occult in this former Soviet Union. The book is a collection of essays that were presented at Fordham University in the Bronx in 1991, I believe. And basically, it begs two questions. Firstly, you learn about a whole other world of occult that we didn't know about outside the West. Well, it kind of within the Western tradition. It doesn't look too much into shamanism and stuff like that, which is a big thing in Siberia and so on. But it does into many other things. And it's one of these books that I didn't know that before. Oh, I didn't know that before. Well, that's very interesting. But it also begs the question, why were elite American universities and the Soros Foundation interested in the occult and had to get their hands on it ASAP as soon as the Iron Curtain went down? So that's The Occult in Russia and the Soviet Union by Bernice Rosenthal. Highly, highly recommended. It's also, you can see like all the notes I've over the years, it's full of very interesting illustrations as well. And it's almost there was all kinds of underground newsletters and stuff in the Soviet Union, Russia. There was a kind of I believe it or not, a kind of a Bolshevik capitalism even at one point. So yeah, you want to read something on the occult that's truly left field, no pun intended. The Occult in Russia and the Soviet Union. That's my recommended book this week.
Thank you, Thomas. And this week, I'm suggesting Conversations with Nostradamus, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Now, I don't have the physical book with me because I've loaned them out. So I've got it here on the Kindle app. I don't know if you can see that there, but I will put pictures up in the edit. So Dolores was a hypnotherapist, and most of Dolores's hypnotherapy sessions were centered around past life regressions, where she or her clients could tap into a past life. And this was where she realized her ability to time travel. And although most people would assume she literally physically time traveled, she didn't. She simply induced hypnosis and traveled through time with the subconscious mind. Now, in her sessions with Nostradamus, she traveled back in time whilst under hypnosis and contacted the prophet. And the interesting part was that it happened by accident. At the time, she was working with a woman who wanted to know if she had a past life. And during the session, the woman was regressed to a past life where she was actually a student of Nostradamus. And at some point during the session, the woman said that Nostradamus wanted to speak to Dolores because Nostradamus had a message for her, and he was looking for a link to the future because he could see the prophecies he'd written were not being correctly interpreted, and the time was coming when they were going to come true. So Nostradamus told Dolores to get his book of prophecies in ancient English, and she must read them to him, and he wanted to explain what they meant by providing the codes that were lost over the last 4 centuries. And he informed Dolores that she'd be able to contact him through any of her clients, not just the one that she was working with at the moment. And she later went on to describe this connection she shared with him as if she had his telephone number. And he even gave her a secret way to test whether or not she was actually talking to the right Nostradamus and not an imposter. So the 3 volumes go into detail about the rise and location of the Antichrist, including his horoscope, the correlation of 666 and computers. It talks about the world being networked by one central computer, talks about the Third World War and what countries will be affected. It even goes into androgyny, which is what we've just been talking about earlier. Talks about the fall of the Vatican and all organized religions. It goes into detail about dangerous new technologies to control the weather and earthquakes. And there are maps that show portions of the continents that remain after the axis shift and the melting of the polar ice caps, and the role of space visitors during the time of tribulations. It is a fascinating read, especially during these strange times we do find ourselves in. But I must point out, it's not all doom and gloom in this book. Nostradamus did say there are many timelines at play, which is what we both agree on as well. And if people are aware of his prophecies and can take steps to prevent them, then we can avoid the particular timelines that each prophecy is set to occur on and get ourselves onto another timeline where it doesn't happen. And it really, really is an interesting book, especially at this point where we are in time.
I was involved in a documentary project with someone who I'm not going to name the person, who had worked with Dolores Cannon and had done several tours with her of the UK and Ireland, and said that she was a formidable woman. She was very serious about what she did, and there was nothing airy fairy or anything about her. She was a very intense person and a very determined person, and with a strong belief in her work, which is always like a good sign. But yeah, so thanks for that. I might even get that one myself. That sounds like a good read.
It is,
But
it's a good read.
yeah,
Highly recommended.
I've seen a few interviews with Dolores Cannon online and a few lectures and stuff, and she's definitely was a very different kind of person. She was definitely a maverick in her own way.
Mm-hmm. She died in a very mysterious way. The official line was she tripped and fell down the stairs, but if you read into it, she did get involved with some UFO agencies because she was dealing with regressions of abductees. And when she started to get involved in that, she even said that that they, whoever they are, they may want to take her out and shut her up to silence her because she was going too far into something that she shouldn't have been going into. And the next thing we know, she trips and falls down the stairs. So who knows?
Well, everybody, that's this week's book recommendations. I think there's there's something about the Hocus Focus too, in that it we want to be kind of like a clipping service, that we want to notice the archive the things that are happening in the world. And if you have any ideas to share possible topics or things, interesting stories, people have already sent me a ton of stuff, and thank you for that. And I've created a special folder on my thing, and I'll share it with Sarah as well. That it's just an endless thing. We have so many rabbit holes we can go down. But thank you for all that, and thanks again for watching the second episode of Hocus Focus here on Sarah's channel. The next one will be back on Beyond Route 313. So I'll leave the wrap up with you, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for watching again this week. Thank you for the subscriptions. Don't forget, next week it's back on the Beyond Room 313 channel. So if you haven't already subscribed, please make sure you do so you don't miss an episode. And please, please share us far and wide among your social media so that we can reach more people who might find our show an interesting break from the norm and just, something different.
Yeah. And
thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you enjoyed everything else we've done tonight. And we'll have more of the same and much, much more next week on Hocus Focus. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Gingerbread.